Thank you for joining us on the Going Deeper podcast, a ministry of Fathom Church in Littleton, Colorado. You will never get to the bottom of the depths that are in Christ for you. And our hope with this podcast is that it will help you go deeper with God. So let's dive into this episode of the Going Deeper podcast. What's up, everyone? This is your host, Kyle Knight, and welcome to the Going Deeper podcast. Man, just hope these conversations help you go deeper in your relationship with God. I'm in the podcast studio at Fathom Church with our very own missions and events minister, Karina Bost. Hello, Karina.
Hey, hey.
And our lead pastor, Chris Martin. Hello, Chris.
Hola.
Hola. I think we've heard
Como
hola before, but
estas?
that's okay. That's fine. We've heard hola before. But that's fine. I thought
It's a multilingual.
You need to learn some
A
different
multilingual
languages.
podcast for our Spanish friends, Spanish speaking friends.
Yeah. As you can see by the title of this episode, we're talking about dating. Woohoo! I was looking at these two trying to get some excitement for this one. Yippee dating. Yeah, but we wanted to talk about dating. Dating, especially as a Christian, whatever age, younger, older, we want to talk about dating and the what is the purpose of dating? Is it important to date? Should you date as a Christian? All that kind of good stuff. But Pastor Chris, why don't you sort of kick this thing off of like why is it important to talk about dating? Why should we be talking about dating?
Yeah, so this is wild. And there's a lot of perspectives on this in evangelical Christianity. So we're going to undoubtedly disagree with maybe even one another, but certainly with people in our church. And so let's just have some charity when it comes to this conversation. But biblically, dating doesn't exist. So let's just make it clear right off the bat. There was no such thing as dating in the Bible. And some Christians have just said, okay, then we won't do that.
There's no like Christian Mingle or like dating apps.
Yeah, it's not like, you know, do you like me? Check yes or no.
Oh, that was
that and pass that note. Like, it's just not, guys. It's just not a concept that we see in the scriptures. We see betrothal in the scriptures, but almost all marriages were arranged marriages. And dating, like in our modern framework of like casual romantic relationships, those didn't exist. There were marriages, and then it was infidelity. And that's pretty much it. Right? Like there was adulterous relationships and there were monogamous relationships, and that was it. So dating is a newer phenomenon. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying like we have to be honest with the fact that it's not a biblical idea. It's not, maybe some would say it is anti-biblical, but I would say it might be more neutral, but it certainly is nuanced that we need to work through. So we're not going to be able to find like, here's the dating verse, which is in some ways good, but it's also in some ways bad. So that's where I would start with the dating conversation. It's like, all right, should Christians do, like, even like before we ask what is it and how do we do this, like, should we do this? If it's not explicitly in the text, like, should we move back to arranged marriages and betrothal periods before consummation of those marriages?
Karina, that's a question for you.
That's for you. As somebody in this room who is about to marry off her firstborn.
It's totally an arranged marriage.
Oh yeah.
I know. I actually, though, I know of a family in another country who has two experiences with arranged marriages, and one worked out really well and one worked out really terribly. And I think arranged marriages are kind of a thing that you just don't see anymore. And maybe if it was universally practiced, it would look different. But I think now it's kind of not as ideal because you can still end up with the same issues in an arranged marriage as without. That was,
well, and even in more recent history, if we move away from arranged marriages, dating is still a newer phenomenon in terms of like, I would, I'm no historian, so I'll just throw it out there, but I would bet that dating in its modern form didn't come about until probably the sexual revolution. I think before then, courting was the more appropriate way of doing this. And that was not an arranged marriage. It was more of a family overseen relationship experiment. Courting courting was in some ways a precursor to the modern dating phenomenon. But yeah, I even so, there was a lot more community involvement. It is privatized. Dating has become privatized. And then now we move into like hookup culture and all this stuff that is almost like the extreme version of what dating has kind of turned into. So wild.
Right. And I don't think we need to spend too much time talking about like, oh, let's talk about what dating is. Is going on a group date to a movie, is that considered it? Like, I don't think we really like need to talk about that kind of stuff. If there's any teenagers or young adults thinking about if was that a date that I went on with them? I don't know, just talk to them. But I guess this is the big question, and we'll start there, is like, should Christians date? I mean, there's more to that, but I'm going to put it out there as, should Christians date? Who wants to take that one first? Softball.
I don't like the word should.
Okay.
So let's punt on that. Don't should all over me. That's what people like to say. It's a big pile of should. So
what would you like me to use?
Is
it wise for Christians to date?
So let's back up. I think we have to level up a question and ask first, before we ask, is it appropriate for Christians to date? I think we should ask, what do we mean by dating? Like, what do we mean by it? And what is the purpose, the desired outcome of dating? So let's bounce some ideas. Let's whiteboard this a little bit, okay? Let's not try to define it. Let's just try and explore some of the options that might be out there as to why people date. What's the purpose of dating?
I would first say, I was going to say this very definitively, that the purpose of dating is to find out who you're going to marry. But there's all holes that you could poke into that. But I guess the purpose of dating is to one purpose would be to figure out who you're compatible with and who God might have planned for you and in marriage. That's one.
Okay. What do you think, Karina?
That's a good one. I mean, I think you could, some people could say dating is just entering into a relationship with someone just for fun, for amusement, for to kill time until I get more serious about what's next.
Okay.
I'm not saying I agree with that form of dating. I'm just saying it is a form of dating.
Right. Yeah, that absolutely. Right. So like if in Kyle's version, should 13-year-olds date?
Okay, well, I'm going to straight up. I told my kids that they shouldn't date in high school. It worked really well for me as a parent. I just think in the younger ages, you don't necessarily know what you want. And I think there's just a lot of temptation that they're not mature enough to handle at that age. So I advise my children not to date in high school or middle school, just to be friends.
Yeah.
But that worked out real well.
But I think some of the pushback on that argument would be, well, they're learning how to do relationships with the opposite sex, and
at 13.
That's the argument. That's the argument.
Yep.
Is how do you know? How do you know who you are actually compatible with if you've not tried it out? You know what I'm saying? That's the argument on the other side. I'm not saying that I'm a proponent of that argument, just to be clear with everybody who's listening. Yes. But that's the argument, because the world thinks that's crazy. What we just said, that dating is for finding a spouse, the world would say that's not what dating's for. Yep. Dating is for vetting. Dating is for experimenting. Dating is for casual, low bar commitment. Dating is for feeding your sexual appetite. Dating is for, fill in the blank. I just like having a girlfriend. That's what dating is for. So what do we think dating is? Let's move away from the whiteboard. What do we think for the Christian dating should be for?
I think it's pretty much what Kyle said. It's coming to a place of, is this someone I could marry? I don't know that you know that when you first start dating. But I think if you get to the point where you're like, this is definitely someone I can't marry, then you probably shouldn't continue to date them.
Yeah. Well, I would agree wholeheartedly with that. Yeah. Okay. So let's say then this, when should a Christian start dating? I'm not asking for an age. I'm just saying, when should a Christian start dating? Maybe, I mean, you could say, 16, 22, 96. What's your?
I think for me, it would be, man, because like when I think about that, I think of like my past with dating and thinking of those people, especially younger, who start dating, who still don't really, they're still don't really understand like who they are to God and their relationship with God. I think the big thing for me when you ask that question is always just like, man, well, like, do you like what is your, as a Christian, what does your relationship with God look like first? Like if like, do you have a relationship with God? Like, are you mature in your relationship with God? Are you still trying to figure out like if you're a Christian or not? That's probably not the best time to be like, oh, I'm going to just start trying to find my wife now. Like learning, like opening the scriptures and opening the Bible and seeing what a biblical marriage is and biblical relationship is. Like, if you can read all those and get to a point where you're like, hey, I believe God is like ready for me to find that, then I think you're ready. But if you don't even have a like close relationship with your Lord and Savior, then it's like, I think there's other things you need to like kind of work on before thinking about your spouse or dating or something like that. So, I mean, all that was all over the place, but.
Okay. Karina? When?
I don't know. I mean, I think there comes a point where, I think if you're too young, there's just so many temptations you're not equipped to handle in a relationship. So I think there's like a maturity in that sense. And then kind of what Kyle was saying, just where you're at with God. If you're a Christian, that's important. It's like where, if you can't define your relationship with God, you probably shouldn't be entering into relationships with other people. But then just even, if you fall hard for this person, they're the one, are you in a place where you can actually get married? I think those are 3 important things to kind of consider. If you're like, oh, I'm nowhere close to being able to get married, then what happens when you find out this is the one? I mean, not to say that God can't do things and that he hasn't. I'm probably a huge testimony on the opposite of this, but I've also learned that it might have looked a lot different had it.
So I think you just hit the nail right on the head. If dating is to find the person that you're to marry, then I don't think you should date until you're ready to marry.
Right.
Or at least in that range. Okay. Now that doesn't mean I think you should wait until you have to wait until you're post college. Okay. Cause I am pro getting married young. I know that's a wildly unpopular thing in our culture today because everybody's waiting. But I heard a guy say marriage is a cornerstone, not a capstone. Marriage is a cornerstone that you build your life on, not a capstone that you set on top of it once you've got it built. And I think that's a real helpful way to think of this, is that like when Marcy and I got married, we were young and dumb and we grew up together. And that's how we figured life out. We figured it out together. Now we weren't, unconsciously young. That's not even a word, but
Sure. We know.
Sure. It wasn't inappropriately young, but she was still finishing up school. I was done. And how do you know when you're ready to marry? You're ready to marry when you can pay some bills. You're ready to marry when you can find a place. You're ready to marry when you can put food on the table. Like you're ready to marry when you can leave and cleave. That's when you're ready to marry. and then there's the emotional side of things and the spiritual side of things and all that stuff. But I would say you're playing the world's game of definition of marriage if you're not trajectory wise moving. And so some would say, well, then what about the end of high school? Because you can get married in college. And I would say, okay, if that's your intent in dating is to try to prepare yourself for marriage in a healthy way, and then I'd say go for it. And now hear me, I'm speaking from a place where I did not follow that at all. Now partly because I wasn't saved. Okay. But other reasons too. I didn't understand it. I didn't practice that. And so like I can remember in 6th grade having a girlfriend, okay, who, hear me, I fell hard for her. And then she dumped me.
What was her name? What was her name? Drop her name.
I'm not going to drop her name. I'm not going to drop her name.
Kidding.
But hear me, I remember being a 6th grader falling hard for this girl. She dumped me right before summer vacation and feeling like my heart was broken. And I don't think that 11-year-olds are supposed to feel that. I just don't think that's how it's supposed to be. I think that is an inappropriate experience for an 11, 12, 13-year-old heart to go through. And what if that's not how it's supposed to be? Like what if, and I think people are like, oh, well, that's just, you're learning. No, that's stupid. I think that's stupid. You're not learning at that point. You're just getting hurt at that point. And then you move into pubescence and beyond, and it just gets more complicated. And it just gets more complicated, and you don't think straight, and you're just a mess. And all of my hurts and wounds from bad relationships, bad decisions came into my marriage. There's just, it's a different type of wound that follows you. And so I would just say, man, wait on that. Wait on that. That's my 2 cents on it. So,
okay. So let's say we're at a point where we're at that age. We know, like we're ready to date for marriage. Like we're ready to get married. Like we kind of agreed on, like we are ready to get married. What are the things that we should be looking for when dating? Looking for in a partner, somebody who we want to date with the intent of a Christian marriage. What are the things that we should be kind of, I guess, like vetting some people for, of really like looking for, because I'm sure there's people even like in our church who are at that point where they're ready to get married. So what should they be looking for? Yeah.
I mean, lots of things. You've already mentioned some of them, right? Like how's their relationship with God? How do they, I've even mentioned some, like, can they provide, right? I mean, both from a male and a female perspective, like even for guys looking at girls, is she a hard worker? Or is she just kind of drifting? Like, does he have some focus, some vision for his life? Or is he just kind of like, hanging out in mama's basement playing video games all day? Like, okay, sorry, that's not going to pay the bills. It's not going to pay the bills. So I have always kind of taught this to young adults, specifically using 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 12, which is kind of like it's like the youth ministry passage. Oh, yeah. Like it's a good old youth pastor passage. But let me frame this out. It says, 1 Timothy 4:12 says, let no one despise you for your youth, but set the believers an example. And then it gives 5 categories. Set the believers an example in speech, in conduct, in love, in faith, and in purity. And so I like to take those 5 things and use those as kind of a grid. So I'm like, if I'm talking with a college student and male or female, and they're maybe interested in somebody in one of their classes, or a roommate's friend or something like that, and I would say, okay, so let's look at those first thing, those 5 things first. How it says set an example in speech. So how do they talk? Like, what do they talk about? Right. What words come out of their mouth? Very legitimately, are they saying things that are inappropriate? Are they making crass jokes? Are they respectful in how they talk? Not just how they talk to you, because hear me, if it's a dude to a chick, he should be really trying to flower things up at that point. But how do they talk to waiters? How do they talk to their parents? How do they talk to professors? How do they talk to friends? Are they slander? Or back to a previous podcast, are they gossiping? Like what do they talk about? Do they only talk about shallow things, or do they talk about deep things? Like, what does their speech reveal about their character? Because this is what you're trying to do in dating, is assess someone's true character, not just, oh man, she's hot. Mm-hmm. Because like we talked about in another podcast, gravity and time will win. Hot is a temporary status. Okay, it's a temporary status. So what's beneath that? We're trying to assess character. So how do they talk? The second one is how do they act? Like in their conduct, how do they behave? And I get it. Like, it's okay to be young and dumb and silly and fun and, I mean, I did wildly dumb things in college. Okay. But when it comes to how they act, like, what's their behavior like? I can't tell you how many times I hear from people, oh man, there's this really great Christian guy I know. But man, he does this, smokes weed. Mm-hmm. Oh, really? It's a really great Christian guy I know, but he drinks a little bit too much. Yeah, that's a problem, right? Like, great Christian guys don't do that. Mm-hmm. So and you're not looking for perfection here, but how does this person act? What's their behavior? What does what they do point to the fact that they are a man or a woman of integrity? Third, how do they love? Like, what are their relationships like? Is there and I mean this from like parents to siblings to friends to, is there a long trail of past breakup relationships that's just ugly and desolate? Like, is that, you better look at that. You better look at their track record, because how they love in the past is probably indicative of how they will continue to love you. So play that card out. How do they follow Christ? That's the third one. Or the fourth one is like, what's their relationship with God? Mm-hmm. And this comes back to Kyle, to what you said. Like, are they? I think sometimes we take the equally yoked thing and we just say, oh, as long as they say they're a Christian, then we're equally yoked. No, that's not equal. Mm-hmm. That might be yoked, but one of y'all is yoked up way more than the other one. So like, how yoked up are they? Right? Oh yeah, I met them on Christian Mingle and they said that they're a Christian. Well, do they go to church? Sometimes. Oh, so they sometimes go to church. If they do go to church, are they involved? Do they serve? Do they give? Do they belong? Do they have mentors? Do they have, are they doing spiritual disciplines? Are they doing anything? Because we've lowered this expectation level to just like, well, yeah, he says he's a Christian. Right. Yeah, she was raised religious. I'm just telling you, it's not going to work. You're setting yourself up for heartbreak. So don't lower that bar. And then finally, how do they do purity? And I mean that from like pornography all the way to, how does he treat you? How does she tempt you? How does she dress? How handsy is he? Like, I mean, all of those things mean something about his character or her character. So I think that's a helpful grid. Yeah. But again, come back to this. You're looking for a person of character. You're looking for a man or a woman who not that's just gonna, be lights out attractive to you always, because beauty fades. It does. It changes. I do premarital counseling with tons of couples, and I hear it from almost every couple. I have couples say their fears to one another. What am I afraid of in marriage? And almost every couple I've ever done premarital counseling with has said, I hope you don't stop loving me when my body changes. It's a universal fear. And hear me, it's a universal fact. Mm-hmm. You're going to get fat. If you have a baby, your body's going to change. Guys, dad bod is a real thing. It's a real thing. So you better be looking for something that's a little bit more meaty underneath the surface. And that's where character comes into play.
So I'm glad you went through those, because I do feel like, especially in Christian cultures and Christian churches, is when someone gets to that age of they're ready to date, to get married. I feel like there's a lot of pressure, I think, in some Christian circles and in churches of people to get married. And that kind of pressure, I think, could drive people to get married, just to like find that person, do it super quick without really knowing them. I think that is a good scripture to really be intentional to do your due diligence in figuring out what is it you're looking for, and does this person meet those kind of things? Because I do feel like there is a lot of pressure on even young singles in the church to be like, hey, when are you going to get married? Come on. And it's I think we need to be careful with.
Yeah. So let me, I want to pitch this question to you, Karina. Get ready. So I just gave you that nice little grid, nice little list. And we've got a great group of single people in our church, single people in their 20s and 30s primarily. Okay. Talk to them. When they hear that list, they think, right. Because I've been looking for that, and I don't know where to find that. I don't know how to find that. I feel like I either am relegated to singleness or settling.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you say to somebody who's in that? And listen, we know lots of friends in our church who have that that place. They're at that place right now. What do you say to them?
First, I think settling, that's just a lie that's just a lie that is going to make you compromise your standards. It's going to just lead to unhappiness or discontentment. So while it might be discouraging to look around and say, this is not a person I'm seeing out here. So you're just saying that I should be single. That's not what I'm saying, but I'm also saying if you settle, that's just creating tension and strife in your life. At some point, those realities of where you settled will surface and create problems and heartache and issues. But on the flip side, I think, and I'm not saying this is true for everyone, but if you looked at this list for yourself, are these things that you are? I think we can often say, hey, I'm looking for this, but these are 3 areas I'm really struggling in. I know for me, when I was dating, there was probably things I needed to work on that I was just straight up ignoring. So are you working on your own spiritual health? What's your speech like? What's your conduct? What's your love? What's your faith? What's your purity? I think those are 5 things that you could look to yourself. And I don't know. I got married really, really young. So I kind of skipped the searching and dating. So I don't know if I'm the best voice for that category, but
yeah. And I think you're right. I think I've done enough marriage counseling to know that there is a worse thing than being lonely. I can't even imagine the truth of feeling lonely, feeling like the worst thing. But I've just sat in rooms with people where they wish they were lonely. I mean, there's just, even as a married person, I can say there's nothing lonelier than laying next to the person that you're married to when things aren't good. It's better. This is why Paul says, listen, it's better.
Yeah.
Now, I don't mean that to downplay what marriage is or even downplay what singleness is or the difficulties, but there are worse things than being alone. And one of them is being in a terrible marriage. So I would say that, but I would also say, hey, you know what? Settling is not the answer. Relegating yourself to, well, I guess I'm going to be single isn't the answer either. I think it's finding contentment because I know men and women in their 30s and in their 40s and in their 50s who are content, even if they want to be married, who are content in Christ, have found contentment, even if they still desire in their heart to be married. I know men and women in those categories who have full, rich lives, who live, complete as human beings. And that's one of the other lies that our world throws at us is that you complete me is right. Is that, I mean, that's a lie. The lie is that you will never be complete until you have some sort of romantic sexual relationship. That's not true. Jesus was the perfect human being, and he was complete and he was single. So I just don't think that's a necessity for humanhood, for like complete personhood. And that's, again, not a popular view in our world today. But But yeah, I think that's where then dating comes into this whole conversation, is to say, like, if you're just out there just to have fun and break hearts, I'm nervous. I'm nervous for you, and I'm ultimately nervous for the people who you're in relationship with. Yeah. But if you're out there saying, hey, I'm really trying to find my spouse, and if I start dating somebody and it's like, nope, then I'm out, and I want to be respectful, and I want to be honorable, and I want to pursue these 5 areas and look for these 5 areas, and I think, okay, that's probably the version of dating that Christians should participate in.
And I think, just like you said, if you're just looking for someone to complete you, to fill you up, you're looking in the wrong place.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. All right. Any last things on dating?
I'm good.
Stop dating people. I'm just kidding.
All of the teens need to break up right now.
No, that's not what we're saying. Okay, cool. Well, thank you guys so much for this conversation and this discussion. Thank you, church, for listening, and we'll see you next time.